So today we're diving deep into Narendra Modi. We've got articles analyzing his achievements, some background from Wikipedia, and even comments from people, like actual citizens in India. So you are going to get, I think, a fascinating, well-rounded view.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because he is such a polarizing figure. It's going to be interesting to move past those simple narratives, right? Like, is he a hero or a villain? We'll grapple with the true complexity of his impact.
Exactly, and it is complex. We're talking about someone who, helped run electricity to thousands of villages, but also faced protests from farmers over some of his policies. Why? That's what we're going to try to uncover.
Yeah, the why is so important, right? I mean, it's easy to just, look at like facts and figures, but when you try to understand like the context and the motivation and even, the unintended consequences, that's when you really start to reveal the impact of a leader.
Totally. So let's start at the beginning. I mean, everyone knows the story of Modi selling tea as a child. I think it's a pretty powerful image, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it sort of invokes that classic self-made man, rising from poverty to become a leader in, the world's largest democracy. And that resonates with a lot of people, especially in India, where social mobility can be difficult.
But there's also this other side, right? Like there's been some controversy over Modi's academic credentials, some discrepancies, even missing documents have come up.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? You have this like image of the self-made man, and then there's this lack of clarity about his qualifications. I think that gap is definitely something to think about. It raises questions about transparency, especially for a leader who's always emphasizing, like efficiency and concrete results.
Almost a recurring theme with Modi, like these two sides of the story. Which leads us to his rise in the BJP. Now, he was involved with the RSS from a very young age, which it's a Hindu nationalist organization. I think that context is really important to understanding him.
Oh, absolutely. The RSS ideology with its, emphasis on Hindu identity and cultural revivalism, it's definitely shaped Modi's worldview and approach to governing.
Totally. And then, of course, we had the 2002 Gujarat riots, a very, very sensitive and very debated topic. He was chief minister at the time, and there were accusations of complicity. But a court later stated that they found no evidence to actually support these accusations. But it remains a very sensitive issue.
Yeah, very complex. There are strong opinions all over the place. And I think this really just highlights the danger of having only a single narrative. You really have to look at these events from multiple angles, and be cautious about being too quick to judge.
Right. And what's also interesting is that even with all this controversy, Modi won 3 terms in a row as chief minister of Gujarat. So that tells you something, about his political skills, right? To maintain support even with that level of criticism.
Oh, absolutely. He's a very strategic thinker. He connects with a lot of people, regardless of what his critics may say.
So now let's talk about development in Gujarat under Modi's leadership, because this is where those conflicting narratives really come into play. On one hand, there was a really impressive economic growth. They were averaging about 10% GDP growth. They topped the charts for ease of doing business in India.
So at first glance, you'd say, okay, classic success story. His policies attracting investment, boosting specific industries seems to have, paid off.
But then you look at things like poverty, malnutrition, even education. And things aren't looking so good. They actually had a pretty poor record in these areas.
Yeah, exactly. And this is like where the narrative of growth at all costs starts to break down a little bit. You have to ask, were those economic gains reaching everyone? Or was it actually making inequality worse?
And then you see that play out in specific examples, too. They had these really successful groundwater conservation projects. Over 500,000 structures built. But at the same time, they had these large dam projects touted as symbols of progress, but they had really limited reach and impact.
Right. It reminds us that you have to go beyond just, the big numbers. You have to ask, who's benefiting from these policies? What are like the unintended consequences? Like what are people actually experiencing, not just what's the economic data saying?
Totally. So now fast forward to the national stage. Modi wins a landslide victory in the 2014 general election. That was a huge turning point. And I think his campaign slogan really captured the mood of the nation. Good days are coming. It spoke to a nation that really wanted change.
Yeah, he really tapped into those aspirations. It was a message of, hope, strong leadership, a clean break from the previous government that, a lot of people saw as corrupt and stagnant.
Absolutely. And his approval ratings have been consistently high throughout his terms. So those messages clearly resonated with people.
Yeah.
But why? Is it charisma? Is it actually effective policies? Or is there something else going on?
It's got to be a mix of things. Part of it is, how perceptions are shaped. You've got the media, you've got like political rhetoric, and of course, what people are actually experiencing.
Totally. Okay, so to really understand his leadership, we have to look at his policies. I think for clarity, we should look at them thematically instead of chronologically.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That way we can see how different areas are connected and maybe even see what the overarching vision is, if there is one.
Right. So first, economic policies. We've got the Make in India initiative, which focused on, boosting domestic manufacturing, attracting foreign investment. Then there's that demonetization thing, which was really controversial. The idea was to reduce black money and promote digital payments. But I think we all know it had mixed results.
Oh, yeah. Demonetization was a gamble for sure. It definitely sped up the adoption of digital payments. But did it actually work in getting rid of black money? Still up for debate. And it really messed things up, especially for people in the informal economy, the ones who rely on cash.
Right. And then there was the goods and services tax, or GST, this huge reform meant to simplify the tax system. A lot of people saw it as a good thing with more sensible tax brackets.
Yeah.
But the implementation got some criticism, and we're still waiting to see the long-term impact.
Right. I mean, the GST had been a long time coming. A lot of economists were really optimistic about it. But any big change like that's going to be tough to roll out. It's going to take some time to see how effective it really is.
And we can't forget all the criticisms of Modi's economic policies in general. Concerns about hidden unemployment data, worries about, rising income inequality, which is, a big issue in India anyway.
Yeah, those criticisms are important. They remind us that you can't just look at the overall economic numbers. Growth doesn't mean that everyone's benefiting. You got to look at who's getting left behind.
Exactly. Now, on the other hand, he did try to reform things. He repealed over 1,200 laws that were just outdated, trying to get rid of bureaucracy, simplify the rules.
Yeah, that was big. Getting rid of that red tape can make things a lot easier for businesses. And it shows that he's willing to modernize and adapt, which is really important in today's world.
Totally. All right, so let's move on to social policies. One of the big ones was the Swachh Bharat mission, or the Clean India mission, this ambitious goal to get rid of open defecation. And they did have some success, sanitation coverage did go up, but changing social norms is really hard, even with a government pushing for it.
Yeah.
So now the challenge is making sure those new facilities are actually used and taken care of.
Yeah, the Swachh Bharat mission is a great example. It shows how even well-meaning policies run into problems. It's not just about building toilets. It's about changing how people think and behave. And that takes a lot more time and effort.
Right. Modi also focused on programs like the Ujjwala Yojana. That gave LPG connections to households in rural areas so they didn't have to rely on, harmful indoor cooking fuels. And then there was the Beti Bachao program focused on girls' education. So it seems like alongside the economic stuff, there was a commitment to addressing social issues.
Absolutely. I mean, those programs were tackling some of India's biggest development challenges. And, like with the Ujjwala Yojana, there's been a real positive impact on women's health and reducing air pollution inside homes.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole Digital India initiative, expanding internet access, especially in rural areas. We know how much of the world is online now. So bridging that digital divide is super important.
Oh, yeah, it's essential. It opens up so many opportunities, right? Information, education, economic opportunities. If they get it right, the Digital India initiative could really transform lives, especially in those rural communities.
Okay, but we also have to talk about the controversial policies, like revoking Article 370, which took away Jammu and Kashmir's special autonomous status. That was a huge deal.
Yeah, major implications for the region, political, social, everything. And it's still being fought over. It's important to understand the history there and all the different viewpoints and, what the long-term consequences might be.
Right. And then you've got the Citizenship Amendment Act, the CAA, which, caused massive protests and a ton of debate. There were worries about religious discrimination. We can't avoid talking about what the law says and what it could mean for India's secularism.
Yeah, the CAA really brought up fundamental questions about citizenship and belonging, and even about the idea of equality in India's constitution. It showed how much anxiety and insecurity there is in different communities, and it highlighted the need for policies that are more inclusive and sensitive.
And then there was the ban on triple talaq. That's the practice of instant divorce in Islam. And that got mixed reactions too, didn't it?
It did, yeah. For some people, especially women who had been, divorced unfairly through triple talaq, It was seen as a good thing, a step toward gender justice. But for others, it was the government overstepping its boundaries, getting involved in religious matters. It raised concerns about freedom of religion. It's a complicated issue, for sure. It's about finding that balance between, personal laws based on religion and having legal frameworks that protect everyone's rights.
Right. So you can see Modi's policies cover a lot of ground, from the economy to social programs, from trying to modernize things to decisions that have really divided people. It's a complicated legacy to figure out.
It really is. We need to analyze things carefully, be willing to look at different points of view, and recognize that, especially in a country as diverse as India, policy choices always involve trade-offs.
Right. So let's zoom out a little bit and look at his approach to international relations. I mean, he's definitely made an impact globally.
Oh, yeah. He's been working hard to raise India's profile on the world stage, projecting a, more assertive image.
Yeah, for sure. He's been focused on building relationships, especially with the United States. He even got the Legion of Merit from Donald Trump, which shows how much he's focused on personal diplomacy with world leaders.
His foreign policy seems to be a mix of, pragmatism and ambition. He wants to strengthen those partnerships with the big players, but of course he also wants to advance India's own interests, and sometimes those two things clash.
Like with the whole thing about India buying the S-400 missile system from Russia, caused some tension with the U.S., but his government has been clear that they're doing what's best for India, which, is understandable, but it definitely complicates things geopolitically.
Yeah, the S-400 deal shows that India is serious about diversifying its defense partners and about maintaining its independence in terms of strategy. It also shows that it's hard to put India in any one box, geopolitically speaking. They're doing their own thing.
Totally. He's also been pushing the neighborhood first policy, which is all about improving ties with neighboring countries, while also forming strategic partnerships with countries further away.
Yeah, the neighborhood first approach makes sense. Having stability and cooperation in the region is vital for India, both for their security and their economy. But it's a tough area to navigate. There's a lot of history, a lot of rivalry and tension.
For sure. And then you've got India's role in the Quad. That's the dialogue between the U.S., Japan, Australia, and India. It's gotten a lot bigger under Modi.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people see it as like a counter to China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, the Quad's become a really important platform for those countries to coordinate on security, on the economy, on maritime security. They all share a concern about, China being assertive in the region, and they want to keep the Indo-Pacific free and open, which is in line with India's interests.
Then, of course, you've got the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which put India in a really tough spot, trying to balance that long-standing relationship with Russia with those growing ties to the West. Not an easy thing to do.
It shows just how complicated geopolitics can be. You're trying to, stay independent, but you also have to respond to what's happening in the world and work with partners who might have different goals.
Right, and remember Operation Ganga. When India evacuated all those citizens from Ukraine when the war started, that was a massive operation, logistically speaking. And it showed that India can act decisively on the world stage and use its diplomacy to get things done.
Operation Ganga was impressive, no doubt. It showed what they can do diplomatically, and it showed their commitment to protecting their citizens, even when they're abroad. It also highlights how important the Indian diaspora is becoming and how the government is responding to their needs.
Absolutely. Okay, before we move on, we have to talk about Modi's views on climate change, because it's been interesting to watch how they've evolved.
Yeah.
Early on, he didn't seem to think it was a big deal. But in recent years, he's been a lot more vocal about the need to take action and promote clean energy.
Yeah, that change in how he talks about it probably reflects a few things. There's a growing global agreement that climate change is urgent. And India, with its huge population and its reliance on coal, is really vulnerable to the effects of climate change. It's not just some abstract global issue for them. It's a very real problem at home.
Right. He even launched the International Solar Alliance, trying to encourage global investment in solar energy. And India's pledged to become carbon neutral by 2070, which is, incredibly ambitious, especially considering how much they need to develop.
Yeah, those commitments show that they recognize India needs to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
And it's pretty amazing that India has actually already exceeded the goals it set in the Paris Agreement. One of the few big economies to do so. Shows that they're actually committed, not just talking about it.
Yeah, their progress on renewable energy is really something. It seems like they're realizing the benefits of switching to cleaner energy, both for the economy and the environment. And it shows that India could become a leader in this area.
So, while Modi's stance on climate change has clearly shifted, It's important to see how those commitments actually play out. Can they actually achieve those targets while still, meeting their development needs? That's the question.
Exactly. The real test of any climate policy is how it's implemented
Yep.
and what its long-term effects are on emissions and how well it helps people adapt to climate change.
Totally.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about Modi's leadership style, because I think it's a big part of why he's been so successful. He's known for communicating directly, for having a strong personal brand that's been very carefully built. And he definitely has charisma.
Yeah, people describe his leadership as charismatic and decisive. He's not afraid to make bold moves, to project that image of strength and confidence, and that appeals to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And he connects with people directly through things like his Man Ki Baat radio show. He's active on social media, basically bypassing traditional media to create that personal connection.
Yeah, those platforms give him a lot of control over his message. He can create a sense of intimacy and accessibility, which is super powerful these days.
Right. He's also known for centralizing decision-making, focused on getting things done quickly and efficiently.
That approach definitely has its upsides. It can cut through all the bureaucracy and actually deliver results, which people like. But it also raises some concerns about, too much power being in one place and what that means for democratic processes and checks and balances.
Totally. And then there's his public image, which is fascinating. He's really popular, even with all the controversy. You can't deny that.
Yeah, he's able to connect with so many different people. And I think his communication style and the way he projects strength and decisiveness are really key to that.
For sure. And there have been documentaries, web series, all about him. Some positive, some critical, which just adds to his presence in popular culture. It makes you think about how much the media shapes our perceptions, how those narratives, whether they're for or against him, contribute to his image.
Yeah, the media's role in how we understand leaders is huge. It's important to be aware of that influence, to be critical of what you read and watch and listen to consider different points of view and, potential biases.
Absolutely. And remember when they renamed the world's largest cricket stadium after him? The Narendra Modi Stadium? It's controversial, but it shows how much impact he has. His name, his image, they're becoming part of the landscape of India.
That renaming was a bold move. It shows how public spaces can be used to push a certain ideology or story. And it also connects to how important sports, especially cricket, are to Indian identity.
Totally. So you can see how his leadership style and his public image are connected. Projecting strength and decisiveness has been a big part of his success, but it also has a darker side.
Definitely. His communication skills, how he uses the media, that carefully crafted brand, they've all contributed to his popularity. But we also have to ask, what does it cost to have that kind of centralized, personality-driven leadership? How does it affect democratic institutions in the long run?
Which leads to a really important question. What has Modi's impact been on those institutions?
That's where things get really interesting, because we have to look beyond the economic progress and the strongman image and ask, what's happening underneath? Well, there's been, growing concern that democratic norms are being eroded and that power has become too concentrated in the executive branch.
Right. And critics point to things like increased pressure on the media, less space for people to disagree, and even the government using agencies to target political opponents.
The worry is that these trends could have really long-term consequences for, India's democratic institutions, even if the economy keeps growing.
It's like building a house on a shaky foundation. You might have this amazing structure, but if the foundation's weak, the whole thing could collapse.
Exactly. A strong democracy needs more than just a good economy. You need strong institutions, a vibrant civil society, and a culture that, respects freedom of expression and the rule of law.
And that's where I think the comments from Indian citizens that we have in our sources get really interesting. Some people, they express just overwhelming support for Modi. They praise his decisiveness, his focus on development.
Yeah, you can really hear the hope and enthusiasm in their voices. They see him as this strong leader who's keeping his promises and, making things better.
But then you also have people who are very critical. They're worried about religious polarization, about minorities being targeted, about dissenting voices being silenced.
Yeah, and those criticisms are important too. They show us the anxieties and fears of people who feel like they're being marginalized, like they're being excluded from the main narrative.
It's interesting to see these different views playing out in the comments. You see people having these heated debates, accusing each other of, being biased or blind to the truth.
It's like a mini version of the bigger debates happening all across India. And these discussions, even when they get, a little messy, they're important for a democracy.
Absolutely. It shows that people are engaged, they're paying attention, they're not afraid to say what they think, even if it's different from what other people think.
That's exactly what we want to encourage with this deep dive, informed engagement, critical thinking, recognizing that complex issues don't have easy answers.
We've covered a lot. Modi's early life, his controversial rise to power, his economic and social policies, his leadership style, his impact on democratic norms, even his carefully crafted public image.
We've seen how his leadership has been both, transformative and divisive. He's inspired a lot of people, but he's also made a lot of people anxious.
Right, and throughout this whole discussion, we've been saying how important it is to go beyond those simple stories, to consider different perspectives, to really understand the nuances of these really complicated issues.
Yeah, because if you want to form your own opinion, you have to look at all the evidence, even if it's contradictory, even if it makes you uncomfortable.
So where does all this leave us? What's the takeaway for you, our listener?
That's the big question, isn't it? Now that Modi's secured a third term, what kind of legacy is he going to leave? On India, on the world?
That's a great question to think about. We've seen the economic progress, but also the concerns about, how people are doing. We've seen this strong public image, but also all the controversy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no denying the impact he's had on India's politics, both domestically and internationally.
It's not just about Modi himself, though, right? It's about these bigger trends happening in India, the rise of Hindu nationalism, the challenges of inequality, the complexities of governing such a diverse and, rapidly changing society.
Absolutely. And I hope that this deep dive has given you, our listener, some new insights, something to think about, maybe even a few aha moments along the way.
We hope you keep exploring this topic. Read more, look for different viewpoints, have conversations with people. Don't let the learning stop here.
Because understanding leadership, especially someone as influential as Modi, it's an ongoing process. You got to stay curious, stay critical, and never stop asking questions.
Remember, leadership isn't just about the person at the top. It's also about the choices we make as citizens, the values we hold, the future we want to build together.
That's a powerful thought. The choices we make, the voices we amplify, the actions we take, they all shape the world we live in.
Who knows? Maybe this deep dive will inspire you to get more involved, to speak up, to make a difference in your own community.
Because the story of India, like the story of any nation, is still being written. And we all have a role to play in shaping the next chapter.
So get out there, stay curious, and keep learning.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Yeah, it's interesting, right, to think about how much focus we put on individual leaders. Especially in a democracy. It's really, it's the systems and the people that matter most, right?
Right. Modi's decisions and his, personality, they've definitely shaped things. But ultimately, his legacy depends on how those systems change and how people engage with them. Will the institutions that support democracy stay strong and independent? Will people keep holding those in power accountable?
And how is India going to deal with all the challenges of the 21st century? You've got economic pressures, social tensions, all this geopolitical uncertainty. That's not something one leader, no matter how, charismatic or powerful they are, can solve on their own.
No, absolutely not. It takes everyone working together, being willing to talk to each other, finding common ground, even when they disagree. It's about the future of the whole nation, not just one party or ideology.
Totally. So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there one question you'd ask our listener to keep them thinking about Modi's impact and India's future?
That's a good one. What do you think? I think I'd ask. Beyond all the economic numbers and the political talk, what kind of India do you think Modi's legacy is going to create? What kind of society is going to come out of all this change, all this progress, and all this upheaval? And maybe even more importantly, what role do you want to play in shaping that future? As an informed, engaged citizen.
That's a really, really powerful question, and I hope everyone listening really takes it to heart. Because in the end, the story of India, just like any other country, it's still being written. And we all have a role in what happens next. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.